the Legal Corner podcast series. Welcome to today's episode of The Legal Corner, a podcast which covers a variety of legal issues to keep you informed. Hosted by attorney at law Colin Dinoon and communications specialist Leonardo Torres.
So great to be back with you for another episode of the Legal Corner podcast series. I missed you guys the past couple of weeks, but you know how these things go with scheduling of guests and so on. But we are glad and happy to be back with you once more on a Saturday for another episode. We are past the halfway mark in this our final season, and today we are going to be looking at creating a family trust. And our guest is Mr. Zach Anderson. Mr. Anderson has been on this podcast in the past, where he did an episode on creating an estate plan. Just to tell you a bit about him, he is an attorney based in Alabama, the United States of America. He specializes in estate law and elder law, and he recently launched his own practice. All right, so good day to you, Zach, and welcome to the Legal Corner podcast series.
Thank you so much for having me. Had a great time last time and looking forward to this time.
Sure, lovely. Zach, we're going to get right into it. Tell us, what is the legal definition of a family trust?
Sure. So the first thing to keep in mind in this discussion is that trusts are extremely customizable. And that means they can be designed to do a whole host of different things. So a family trust, you can do about a bunch of different things with a family trust. And we're going to talk about those in just a few minutes. But a family trust can do, one or two of the, 10 to 15 things that a family trust is capable of doing, or it can do a lot more. And it's based on, the client and their family. So that's the first thing to keep in mind is any kind of trust, whether it's a family trust or trust for an unmarried person or an irrevocable trust. Trusts are very, very customizable, and it's important to work with a professional in designing one. But generally, a family trust refers to what I like to call kind of a management trust. And that is, it's a trust that makes management of the trust assets, that is, assets that are owned by the trust. It makes management of those assets easier, more smooth, more streamlined, and private. It allows assets to flow under one umbrella for ease of management, particularly if you become incapacitated. You can't manage your own affairs. Maybe you have an accident, or maybe you fall prey to decline in older age or something like that. That's incapacity. Or perhaps you're just incapable of managing the finances, and we need somebody to manage the finances for your benefit. Incapacity is one thing. And of course, death is going to affect us all. We will all have our day where we pass away. And a trust can make the transition of assets from, the client or whoever owns them during the client's life to the next generation or whoever you want to leave a legacy for. So that's kind of the general definition of a family trust.
So walk us through the process of creating a family trust.
Sure. So a family trust is typically going to be created over the course of a couple of different meetings with a qualified estate planning counselor, attorney, or someone like Colin and folks at his firm. The first thing we want to do is we are going to design the trust. Remember, we talked just a minute ago about trust being very customizable. You can do a lot of different things with a trust. We want to design that trust. Who are the trustees? That's the money managers. Who are the beneficiaries? Who is that trust being used for the benefit for? When can the trustee distribute assets from the trust to the beneficiary? Is it whenever the trustee pleases? Is it $1,000 a month? Is it $100 a month? Is it maybe according to some standard for the beneficiary's health, healthcare costs, education, maybe getting more schooling and books and things like that? So when can the trustee pay out from the trust for the beneficiary's benefit? How long does the trust last? What happens when the beneficiary dies? What if there's money left in the trust? What if it's $100,000? Who does that go to? Who manages it at that point? So that's what I mean by designing the trust, walking through all these issues, pros and cons of different approaches and things like that. The second step is to draft the trust. And in the design and the draft and the next step that I'll talk about, you really need a qualified professional to help you with this. But drafting the trust, I think drafting the trust is it's simple, maybe not easy, but you draft the trust. We take the concepts from the design, working with the client, to putting that on paper. So these abstract ideas that we talked about in the appointment, we go from those ideas from the appointment to actually on paper. And then third, this is sort of the final step in the process. This is a really important step, and it's overlooked by a lot of people. And that is coordinating your assets and your life with your family trust. This is sometimes referred to as funding the trust. I think assets, coordinating what you own in your life with the trust, I think is probably a little bit more accurate way to put it. But nonetheless, what that refers to is making sure that all of your assets align with this family trust. So a trust is only as good. This is a big point here. A trust is only as good as the assets that it owns. So if I wrote a trust and I said, everything in this trust goes to Colin, you shouldn't quit your day job, Colin, because I haven't put any assets in that trust. Now, if I put my home in that trust, or I put, my bank account in that trust, different story. That's going to Colin. But just creating the trust in itself doesn't mean a whole lot. You got to fund it. You got to coordinate your assets with the trust. So that's a really important part of the process. And each asset is different. So a financial account is going to be different than real estate. Real estate might be different than some kind of retirement account. In the U.S., retirement accounts are just kind of a whole different ballgame. So those are the three steps to creating a family trust.
Tell us, what is the difference between a revocable and an irrevocable trust?
Yes, revocable trust versus irrevocable trust. Excuse me. The first thing to note is, there are going to be some differences between different jurisdictions in terms of the law. And I think our listeners know that, but the concepts are the same. So general concepts, which is a great thing to get from a podcast, those are going to be the same. We're going to talk about those. Obviously, specific legal advice, not the best to get from a podcast. You want to work one-on-one with Colin or myself. So revocable versus irrevocable. In the United States, at least, revocable is going to be a lot easier to change. Irrevocable, at least under U.S. law, doesn't mean unchangeable. It just means it's a lot harder to change it. And it may not be you, the creator of the trust, being the one to change it. So contrast that with a revocable trust. I have a revocable trust, the Anderson Family Living Trust. My wife and I are trustees. We could change that thing today if we wanted to. We could do whatever we wanted to with it because it's a revocable trust. We could take all our assets out of the trust. Wouldn't make much sense to do that, but we could, if we had a bunch of money, we could buy another house, put it in the trust. We could change the beneficiaries. We could change trustees. It's ours, and we can make changes very, very swiftly and very, very quickly, as opposed to an irrevocable trust. A lot harder to change it. It's not set in stone per se, but it's a lot harder to change it. What you're going to see in the revocable versus irrevocable question, and this is a big topic, is it's control versus asset protection. And a lot of estate planning attorneys are going to talk about this. Revocable gives you all the control, the utmost control, but it doesn't give you a whole lot of asset protection, at least for the trust maker. Now, when I pass away, whoever I leave my assets to, if the revocable trust, becomes irrevocable upon my death, which I'll talk just a little bit more about that in just a second, then, we can get some asset protection. But for me, the revocable trust that I create, revocable trust that I create, I'm not going to get asset protection from that. If somebody sues me, they can generally go after what's in my revocable trust, but I get all the control. So control versus asset protection. With a revocable trust, you get all the control. You don't get hardly any asset protection. With an irrevocable trust, you can get, if it's designed properly, depending on what we are trying to do, you can get asset protection. You can protect your assets from long-term care costs, from creditors, that is people suing you, trying to take your assets if they sued you and won in court. So you can get some asset protection, but it comes at a loss of control. So it really comes down to control versus asset protection. There's one other thing I'd like to add in this discussion about that, and that is that we can get the best of both worlds. So something that is really popular with my clients is revocable during the lifetime of the trust maker that becomes irrevocable upon the death of the trust maker. That gives us the control over our assets during my lifetime. What the assets I have that I, built and worked for, I want to control them. They're mine. I get that during my lifetime, but upon death, and it would be death of me and my wife, it becomes irrevocable. And at that point, I get asset protection for my beneficiaries. So with proper plan, I say proper, with planning, if the client's goals, suggest that this would be a good path for them, something very popular for my clients is a trust that is revocable, a family trust that is revocable during the lifetime of the trust maker or trust makers that becomes irrevocable upon the death of the trust maker. So you can get the best of both worlds.
So walk us through the benefits of a family trust.
Benefits of a family trust, there's quite a few. Some off the top of my head is a family trust is probably going to get you a lot more privacy than not having a family trust. And a family trust, is not required for anybody, and they're not right for everybody. But if privacy of assets, particularly upon your death, if you don't want people knowing what you have or don't have, or what you owe people, or maybe you're debt free, maybe you're not debt free. If you don't want people knowing that, you're going to want to look at a family trust. Now, some people say, I'm dead at that point. I don't really care what you think of me. And that's totally fine. That's the client's, view. That's why we start with a consultation. I got to get to know you, not just your assets. I mean, yeah, I need to know that, but I'm not interested in that at first. I'm interested in your goals, lifestyle, judgments, values, family, what's important to you, things like that. So privacy, that was kind of long-winded there, but privacy is a big one. You can do some tax planning in a trust. I'm not going to get into that on the podcast. It's not terribly interesting. Maybe we could do that another time. But tax planning is a benefit as well. Here's a big one. If you have what we call a blended family, and what that means is you might have stepchildren. You might have been married before your current marriage. And of course, you're happily married in your current marriage, but you may have had a child from a previous marriage or relationship. Well, that could change the dynamics in estate planning, and we can do some planning around that. One final benefit of a family trust would be to protect assets for beneficiaries after the trust maker passes away. Now, again, this is totally up to the client. Some people say, and I've heard this multiple times from clients, they say, you know what? It's if their assets are going to their kids, which is usually what happens, it's their money at that point. If they're not mature by the time I die, oftentimes in America, we live a long time. People inherit assets because their parents pass away, they're 65 years old. The clients tell me it's their money at that point. If they can't manage it well, that's on them. I've had plenty of clients say that, and there's nothing wrong with that approach. Other clients take the position of, I'm going to leave $100, $100,000, $10 million, whatever it is, to my kids. I want to make sure, one, they don't blow it. Two, nobody can sue them and get that money that I worked my entire life for to build generational wealth for my family, including my children. I don't want one of their spouses to be able to get it in a divorce proceeding. So let's do some asset protection, and you can get that from a family trust. Now, there are some drawbacks to that approach, and we'll talk about that maybe just a little bit later.
At this point, we'll take a quick break and we'll be right back. welcome back and thank you for staying with us. Zach, before the break, you were just giving us an overview of the benefits of a family trust. I want to shift gears now and I want to talk about there's this perception that trusts are only for high net worth or wealthy individuals. Is that accurate?
That is not accurate, and that's an unfortunate strain of thought. I think it's perpetuated by non-experts, and I think perhaps people don't have malintent when they say that, although some perhaps do. But it is not accurate. Whether someone would want a trust or whether they think they would need a trust or whether a trust would be a good fit for them and their family is based on their need. It is not based on their assets or their bank account. If you have a child, for example, that it's not going to be good if they inherit cash, then you probably need a trust. Now, that child could be just a poor money manager. That's true. That child could also just be an individual with a disability. They might be on means-tested government benefits. That may be a little bit unique to the U.S., perhaps, I don't know. But it could be that they're incapable of managing their own affairs through no fault of their own. A trust would allow that child, whether they have a condition or not, would allow that child, your children, to live the best life they can live. And that's really what a trust is probably going to be designed to do after the death of the trust maker. Remember, we were talking earlier about oftentimes during the life of the trust maker, it's about control. Just like with my trust that I have with my wife, I want to control it. I want to do what I want, invest it, spend it, whatever. But upon death, it's less about, I'm not going to control it. I'm going to be dead. It's about using whatever I have left to let my beneficiaries live the best life that they can live. And I want to say one thing about there's a concept about generational wealth that is kind of permeating through the societal discourse, I think, throughout the world. And it's great. This is not something that just affects the Rockefellers and Bill Gates and people like that. There is an accountant who is also a lawyer coach. His name is Moshe Amsel, or perhaps Moshe Amsel. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but
yes, I've heard of him. He has a podcast.
He does have a podcast. It's called I believe, Profit with Law podcast. Yes. He has lots of episodes. It's great. It's free. Haven't met Moshe myself, but I feel like I've met him through the podcast, which is kind of the point of doing media. Yes. He tells a story. And I only say this because, it's not my story, but he's said it on the podcast repeatedly. So it's, in the public domain. He said a family member, I think it was his grandfather, left each of his grandchildren, I believe it was about $40,000 in an inheritance. And if I get some of the details wrong, forgive me. But Moshe said that $40,000, Moshe was one of the grandchildren. He said that $40,000 came to him at a time in life that was just the right time, and he used it in just the right way. I don't know what it was. I think it was maybe a down payment on a first house or maybe a down payment on a rental or something like that. Maybe it allowed him to start his business. He is a business owner. That $40,000 gave him just the leg up in life that he needed at the right time to achieve his dreams. That's generational wealth. It's not so much Bill Gates, although I'm sure Bill Gates' children will do just fine financially. It's about whatever it is, even if it's $40,000, giving those after you the ability to live the best life they can. And you can do that with less than billions of dollars.
Doctor, what are the disadvantages of a family trust as we get ready to close?
Yeah, this is a great question. Your listeners might be thinking, "Oh man, I'm in. Let's make one. What's the drawback?" So there are some drawbacks, and I am always open with my clients about what they are. The drawbacks really center around a family trust in general is more work. It's more work on the client, and it's more work on the attorney or counselor. Now, whether it's worth it or not is going to depend on, each family, and, family goals and assets do come into the equation as well. But here's what I mean by more work. One, we have to design the trust. And because trusts are so customizable, we have to walk through, a lot of the things that you and I, Colin, walked through on this podcast just about 15, 20 minutes ago with the, trustees and what happens when one person dies and things like that. We also have to coordinate our assets and our life with the trust. In the U.S., this can get complicated, and I bet everywhere it's complicated. But just as an example, some assets, it's better generally if they go into the trust during the life of the trust maker. An asset like that, an example, is your house. So my house is currently owned by the Anderson Family Living Trust. That is the trust I have with my wife. That is different than, say, my retirement account that I have. I have an IRA, individual retirement account. That thing, at least under U.S. law, doesn't need to go in the trust during my lifetime. We'd have some bad tax consequences if we did that. That is something that if I wanted it to be controlled by the trust, I would want to make sure it goes to the trust upon my death. In fact, actually, upon my death and my wife's death. So just knowing that little tidbit, which is not so little in terms of how consequential it is, that we have to just be really careful with our assets. And we have to go asset by asset and make sure we know exactly what we're doing, why we're doing it, so that it accomplishes all of the goals of the trust. Remember, we said earlier, trust is only as good as the assets that it controls. So we have to coordinate our assets with the trust, and that takes work. It takes work on the trust maker, which is the client. They have to do some digging and sign more documents to coordinate those assets. And it's more work on the attorney. It's usually a couple of months in terms of process, and it's more attorney work. So generally, trusts do have higher fees up front, but a trust can save you money on the back end. We probably don't have time to get into that. But the point is, it may not be more expensive in the long run. It's probably cheaper in the long run in many ways. But up front, it's going to be more work on the client and on the attorney. Now, if you work with someone who knows what they're doing, they're going to make it as seamless as possible, and it's going to be done right. But at the end of the day, it is just more work, more investment, more time, a little bit more money as well. And those are really all of the drawbacks of a family trust have to do with that. It's just a little more work. Is it worth it for you? Sit down with Colin, sit down with a qualified estate planning attorney, and they can engage you in that specific analysis for you and your family.
Any closing comments, Zach?
I don't think so, other than, trusts are just, because they're so customizable, I would not do this by myself. There are things in the legal realm that are very simple that I think you could do so. I think you could do it yourself. I wouldn't do it on this. I know I'm self-interested when I say that, but if you sit down with me or Colin or someone that does this kind of work, and you see kind of what's possible with a trust and just how broad these things can be and how, specifically tailored to your family they can be, your eyes kind of get open and realize that the sky is the limit, and you probably want some help doing this.
Great chatting with you, Zach. Thank you for stopping by again, and we wish you all the very best.
Thank you so much, Colin.
Thank you for listening to the Legal Corner podcast series. For more information, please visit us at our Facebook or Instagram pages, or send your comments to thelegalcornerpodcast@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from you.